Welcome back to another episode of Franklin Covey's twice-weekly podcast on Leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I am your host and interviewer each week, 6 years, nearly 400 episodes that release every Tuesday and Friday, sponsored by Franklin Covey, the world's most trusted leadership firm. I have had the honor and privilege to have been associated with this firm for nearly 30 years, 25 of it as a full-time employee and a member of the executive leadership team. The last 5, I retired from the firm, but was invited back to be an ambassador for a company that I love on content that I am proud to have said have had a huge impact on me as a leader, as a parent, as a spouse, as a friend, as a human. And this podcast exists to make you a more effective leader. Many of you know our company was co-founded 40 plus years ago by the seminal author, Stephen Covey, who wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of those habits, of course, was the habit of listening, the habit of empathic listening, habit 5. In fact, if you would have asked Dr. Covey when he was alive, which was his most difficult habit, he would have said habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And today, our topic is all about adaptive listening. We have 2 experts on listening, 2 communication experts that have joined us to talk about their new book collaboration, Adaptive Listening: How to Cultivate Trust and Traction at Work. Nicole Lowenbraun and her colleague Maegan Stevens have joined us in a 2-author interview to talk about how we all can be better at listening and how do we specifically enhance our own learning and acumen around adaptive listening. Ladies, welcome. Nicole, great to have you on today.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to see you again. We're happy to be here.
Great to see you as well. Maegan, delighted to have you joining us as well.
Can't wait to talk about on listening with you.
I love it. Hey, let's start, actually, Maegan. I'm going to start with you and talk about how we met. You, of course, are senior associates in Nancy Duarte's firm, Duarte. I am a huge fan of all things Nancy Duarte, what she and you all have done as part of that firm to transform your clients' ability to communicate well, whether it's through verbal communication or through storytelling. The arc of stories, the hero's journey is remarkable. Maegan, give us a little bit of a primer on who Duarte is and what the services are you provide.
Happy to do so. We are a persuasive communication company based in the Bay Area. So Nancy and her husband started the company back in the 80s, one of the longest running communication companies in the Bay Area that's women owned and women led. And we work with clients, helping them craft their messages, getting in there for the big events, working with those one-on-ones and helping them be strong communicators. And then we have a whole training business, help people build those slides, make those pitch decks, get ready to get in front of those audiences. And Nicole and I are very lucky that Nancy took a chance on us when we knocked on her door one day and said, hey, we think there's a listening problem in the world, and maybe at Duarte, can we go out and learn how to be better listeners? And she gave us the opportunity to research it, write about it, build a workshop, and then have the book that we're here to talk to you about today.
In fact, Nicole, you may know Franklin Covey has been a longtime client of Duarte. We have hired your firm to help us with the messaging and communication of new product launches, perhaps discussions we've had with our investors. Nicole, as you look back at your association with Nancy Duarte and with Duarte, what's the most resounding principle you have learned that has impacted your own communication style and your own listening style, Nicole?
Wow, what a heavy question. I think my background as a speech and language pathologist fuels me to want to do the best I can for our clients, to make sure that they are really standing out, but also that they are tackling their own insecurities as well, because even as executives, they have to grapple with being authentic, but also serving their internal teams and their clients. So I take a little bit of my speech pathology background with me to Duarte to uncover people's differences in communication and help them lead through authenticity, even with those differences.
In a moment, let's talk about what the concept of adaptive listening is, but first let's talk about what are the 2 sides of any sort of communication listening equation. Nicole, walk us through kind of the basics of what anyone who wants to be a more effective communicator probably needs to remind themselves of or re-immerse themselves in terms of what role they may play on both sides of that equation.
Yes, Megan and I grappled with this when we first got to Duarte. We had a whole conversation about this. We said, we call ourselves a communication agency, and yet all we do is focus on expressive communication, getting your ideas across to another person. So how you pitch, how you speak, how you write, how you stand and deliver a keynote. Well, how can we call ourselves a communication agency when we're not focused on that other side of communication? It is a two-way street. You can't deliver a message effectively if no one is there to listen to it and to absorb it. So when we approached Nancy, we said, we're missing the mark here. There's a whole other side to communication we need to talk about. And that's nobody's fault. It's really part of the Western culture that we've all adopted, that we get judged on our speaking ability. We, even as young kids, get scolded for not speaking up in class. Quiet is not considered an asset for a lot of us. And so what do? We take classes on public speaking. We are promoted based on our opinions that we share in meetings. And we need to focus on that other side as well, because how can you possibly know what to say to your teams, to your investors, to your stakeholders, if you haven't first listened to them? It's nearly impossible to have effective expressive communication if you're not focused on that other side. So as leaders, we think it's tremendously important to balance that. And what we found is that people are just not working on their listening, despite the fact that they're doing it more than 50%, in leaders' cases, sometimes more than 60% of their day. It's just not something we focus on.
Well, I'm quite certain that my marital satisfaction, meaning my wife's marital satisfaction, would increase if I just stopped talking, including how much my kids. In fact, this morning in the shower, as I was thinking about interviewing you, sorry, it was in the shower, I do my best thinking there, I was thinking, my marriage would be off the charts if I just stopped talking. Like literally didn't talk for a day and maybe had like yes or no answers. I really think she would enjoy that. Megan, remind us what it means to master adaptive listening.
The whole idea of adaptive listening is that we know we're supposed to listen when we go to work. That's table stakes. No one ever says in an interview or when they're up for promotion, hey, I'm a really bad listener, so can I get the job now? That doesn't happen. So we thought, all right, well, active listening's been around for a while. People know they're supposed to be active listeners. How do you put that into practice in the middle of the hectic workday you're living now? So adaptive listening says, hey, you can adapt the way you process and respond to help meet the needs of the person speaking to you. So that gets to that still two-sided part of communication. There is a speaker and there is a listener. We're focusing on that listener now and saying, what if you could stop the dialogue that's in your head, that internal monologue, and say, oh, I think I'm listening the wrong way for what this person needs, and pivot and adapt to something else. And then you're able to process the way they need you to process and respond. So Scott, it might not be that your wife wants you to talk less. She just might want you to respond in a different way than you're used to responding.
I think you are right. Okay, I'm going to stay on you, Megan, because I think there are more people like me than the world wants to admit. And so I don't want to turn this podcast into a Scott therapy session, but let's use me as an example. I think you've nailed it. I think my wife wants me to listen to her as her husband, as her friend, not as her boss, not as her leader, not as her investor, not as the person that's delivering a keynote, because I'm so inculcated after, 30 plus years in business of getting to the root cause and solving problems and speaking sometimes sternly to get things done, which isn't always a great leadership style, I recognize. But I listen the same way with my wife as I do at work, with my kids at work. And I don't think it's working well for me as a spouse, as a friend, as a partner, as a confidant, or as a parent. Megan, give us some reminders of how we can just start to be better adaptive listeners for people like me whose primary role or who a substantial role in life is that of business professional, but the more important roles in life are friend, spouse, partner, parent, human.
I'll tell you, Scott, you and I live parallel lives because I work from home. My husband works from home. He's on the other side of this wall, and I can hear every conference call he's on every day. And I, prior to adaptive listening, would walk out of my office with some notes for him because I was like, I heard you say this in this meeting. I don't want you to say that again. I'd prefer if you said it this way, because I am paid to help people be better communicators, and it's really hard to turn it off. But when Nicole and I were in the middle of researching and writing this book and the accompanying workshop, I realized just how poorly I was doing because I was not listening the way he needed. And so one way that you can start to be better in all the circumstances, yes, at work, but also at home and in your personal relationships, is training yourself to say, what does the speaker need from me right now? And in that case, you could say, what does my wife need from me right now? What does my son need from me right now? For me, it's what does my husband need from me right now? And it just breaks me. It gives me this moment to kind of wipe the slate clean and start again and think about what it is that what the person speaking to me really wants. And it does wonders. It does wonders. I was talking to my husband a couple of months ago. We recently had a baby while I was pregnant. He's telling me about these baby books he's reading. I know everything in all these baby books. All right, I've already read the books. I've read more books about making babies than he ever has. And I start one-upping him on the knowledge. And halfway through the second one-up, I stopped and said, oh my gosh, he just wants to connect with me right now and show me he's interested about this new little human we're going to bring into the world. And I had to stop and really switch the way I was listening, both what I was processing, but how I was responding, so we could be in that moment together. So ask yourself, what does the speaker need from me right now? And that's going to help get you out of your own way and help you have that collaborative moment that you really want to have.
Nicole, my sense is that a lot of organizations that had some investment in DE and I are finding out where that land is shifting and settling for them, right? I find a lot of organizations are talking about belonging and how people feel heard and connected. Talk about how someone becomes a better adaptive listener, with the outcome being people feel valued. They feel like they belong. They feel like they matter. I'm guessing that when you become an adaptive listener, you could literally transform engagement and retention in your company because people feel like they matter, like you listened to them.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd argue even before the adaptive listening part, one of the things I love about adaptive listening is it doesn't recognize good listening versus bad listening. It doesn't recognize listening versus not listening. We have an assumption that people at work are generally listening. Sometimes we're distracted, of course, but generally speaking, we all show up with good intentions for listening. We're just not always doing it in the right way. There are 4 different listening styles. We've formed the acronym SAID. You are either, by default, a support listener, an advanced listener, an immerse listener, or a discern listener. Now, before adaptive listening, there were some people at Duarte who would, for example, look out the window while they were talking to me, or look down and take copious notes while they were talking to me. And I, as a speaker, would think, that person's not listening to me at all. They're not paying attention. And now I know, oh, no, that person's just listening differently. So right off the bat, adaptive listening recognizes listening differences, and it helps people give other listeners the benefit of the doubt. Okay, it's not that they're not listening, they're just listening in a different way than I listen, or perhaps they're not listening in the way I need them to listen right now, but the intention is there. So that's the first part. But the second part is, yes, when people listen the way you need them to, folks walk away saying things like, wow, I really felt seen in that meeting. I really felt heard in that meeting. It gives people the opportunity to really connect in ways that they might not have. And it's also very tailored to each individual speaker. So I might walk into a room and say, okay, my CEO, Nancy, I know her, we work very closely together, but what does she need in this moment? It might change. It's not always that the same person needs the same thing all the time. I have learned through adaptive listening to show up in that meeting, ask that question, give them what they need so that they feel connected, they feel seen, they feel heard no matter what. And certainly that helps attrition and retention.
Nicole, I'm going to stay with you for a moment because you said something I think is profound. It seems like most of the books, the podcasts, the conferences, the blogs, the speeches, the keynotes are all about what leaders need to do for their people and for their teams. But you also turned the tables because you said, I need to go into a meeting with Nancy, the CEO, the owner, the boss, and I need to ask myself, what does she need from me? What style of listening do I need to employ today so that Nancy can better communicate her points to me, or that I can understand what she needs from me? And I think it's refreshing to just sometimes turn the tables and say, hey, team, ask yourself, what does your leader need from you? Because I think so much of it comes the other way. Nicole, I'm going to stay with you. Can you rewind a couple of minutes? You talked about the 4 types of adaptive listening. would you take maybe a minute on each of those first two? I'm going to have you describe the first two, and then Maegan, I'm going to come over to you and have you describe the last two.
Sure
Nicole,
thing.
Nicole, you take the first two, and Maegan, you follow up with the last two.
Yeah, let's talk about support listening. We've had some pushback on this one, Scott, because people say, emotions in the workplace. I don't want to pass around a feeling stick. This is terrible. We're here to get a job done. Sure. All the research shows that emotional intelligence is critical to organizational effectiveness. So we argue that support listening has a place in every single interaction you have at work. Yes, every single one, whether it's you talking up, talking down, talking across, talking internally or externally, support listening matters. And support listening is all about validating the emotions of the person speaking to you. Sometimes that's just a smile and a nod. Sometimes it's a, hey, that sounds great. Sometimes it's, I got to sit with that for a little bit longer and quell the emotions of that person because they're looking and feeling so uncomfortable that there's no way we can get the job done until I validate those emotions. So support listening is all about getting those emotions out on the table and acknowledging them. The second one is advanced listening, and that's all about prioritizing forward momentum. So when a speaker needs you to listen to advance, they're looking for you to help them or do it for them, but they're looking for you to help them get to next steps, to cross the finish line, to get a project done. They're looking for some sort of forward momentum, action. Maegan, over to you.
Next up in our SET acronym is immerse listening. So immerse listening is prioritizing the information or the content. And as a listener, that means the person speaking wants you to remember and understand what they're saying. Sometimes this can be hard for people who might be an advanced listener, like Nicole just mentioned. It's not about moving things forward. It's about sitting with it, soaking it in, really deeply understanding it. So you're immersing probably when you're in a company all teams meeting where there might not be anything for you to do or anything for you to judge, but you need to remember this information because it could come up later on as you're engaging. Or maybe when you're in a one-on-one. Sometimes there's that social element of a one-on-one where there's nothing about getting the job done, but tucking those little pieces of information about your communication partner away, whether that is your leader or your direct report, can suit you well when you can recall those and bring them up later on. So that's our immerse listening. And then the last one is discern listening. So discern listening is about prioritizing evaluation. That's the critical listening of, is this good enough or is this not good enough? Is there a red flag here? Is there an alternative solution that no one has thought of, or a path or an option that hasn't come up, but I'm just tuned to listen for that? And of all of the types of listening we found, when people realize they default to a discern listening as their style, they feel bad. Uh-oh, that's me. But we need our discern listeners. We need that because sometimes your organization demands it. So you've heard us use the word listening style and listener. That's because there are 4 styles. You are either support, advance, immerse, or discern as a listening style. And there are 4 goals that a speaker has. They either want you to support, advance, immerse, or discern. So your goal as an adaptive listener is to match up the type of listening that's needed for that interaction for that speaker.
Maegan, do you think it's appropriate or is it outrageous to suggest that a leader might start a meeting and say, hey, there's 4 types of listening styles and there's 4 things speakers need listeners to do. Right now, I need everyone to practice immersive listening, or I need everyone to practice discerning. Is that like a too prescriptive style? How would a leader maybe use these 4 listening styles and 4 outcome needs to maybe more effectively align a team or rally around a crisis or a situation or a project or an intended goal?
Actually, what you described is exactly what we do at Duarte. Everyone at Duarte has been trained in adaptive listening. Everyone knows what their style is, and they're trained to figure out, what does someone need from me in the interaction? I am a leader at Duarte. I sit on a leadership team on the agency side of the business. I am actually Nicole's manager. So I do routinely walk into meetings, and I got a team with a lot of opinions and a lot of energy. And sometimes I am just there to let them know what I heard from my executive team. I just need them to know it. That's my job, to relay the information. So I tell them, I need you to immerse today. I need you to soak it in and remember it because it's going to come up later on. All right. I'm not here to take critique. I don't need you to do anything with it. Please remember. And they'll all coyly smile because they know it. They get it. but because we have a shared language, we're allowed to use it as a shortcut. But if your whole organization doesn't have that shared language, you can think of the essence of the said model. What do you really want from those people? So if they didn't know what immerse listening was, I might say, hey, everyone, no action items today, but I have something I want you to pay attention. I want you to listen. I want you to remember it because it might come up for us later. Got it? Great. And then on I would go. So there's different ways you can do it if you've got the shortcut or if you just want to talk in the style. But what we found from people who've taken the workshop or read the book and don't yet know how to get it into their organization, they just start leading by example. They really start showing up ready to support, advance, immerse, or discern. And other people are looking around going, I want what you got. Why are you doing it different than me? Show me the way. And then that's the way different conversations or meetings or projects are having a much more successful outcome in the end.
Both of you have extraordinary backgrounds academically in communication. Nicole, I'd like to ask you, from your own experience, what's usually happening that prevents leaders, contributors, spouses, parents, friends, humans, from moving into adaptive listening? Is it decreased attention spans? Is it onslaught information? Is it lack of training? Like, what usually is the root cause that people can kind of rally around? Because when I hear someone like you, an authority, tell me why I'm probably doing something, it's usually helpful for me to say, you're right, and if I can just be aware of that, I can move around that or modify it or minimize it. What are the reasons why people struggle to become more effective at adaptive listening?
I think the reason is they didn't know of a better model before.
Yeah.
Again, it's like everybody has good intention for listening. We don't show up to the workplace saying, I'm not going to listen to anybody today. But the problem is, when we were doing research for this book, we were looking at what was previously known as the gold standard for listening in the workplace called active listening, and we felt it fell so short. Because, first of all, not many people know this, but it was created in the 1950s by two psychologists. So it was meant for the therapeutic setting. And they found that therapists who listened for quote unquote total meaning, which was both for content and emotions, were better therapists than those that didn't. So that got translated over the decades into the workplace. And people now think that good listening means paying attention, putting your phone away, nodding and making eye contact. Well, yeah, we expect you as adults in the workplace to pay attention, but we can do so much more than that. And so what we love about adaptive listening is it creates a memorable model for people to uncover the right way to listen at the right time. That's not something that people ever had before. I mean, some of the principles of active listening, like show your listening, leaves me with questions like, well, how? It depends on the situation. Or provide feedback and ask questions. And our rebuttal is, yes, sometimes my CEO does not want me to push back and ask questions. Other pieces of advice, like avoid judgment. As we've said before, judgment is absolutely critical in certain situations in the workplace. So the problem is we had all of this lovely and well-intentioned advice floating around left over from the days of active listening, but nobody had a formula to follow it at the right way at the right time.
I am loving this conversation because that I had this book 8 years ago, the CEO would have liked me more because I don't know that I ever thought, you know what? Maybe he doesn't want my feedback on this. That's probably called self-awareness, but it's a great point. Maegan, I'd love to know, what have you learned about your own communication and listening style after having published this book, designed the corollary work session? We'll talk about that in a moment. But also all the research and keynotes. Maegan, what have you learned about how you listen and what you've done differently to improve your listening?
I am an advanced listener of our 4 listening styles, which means when I'm listening, I can't help but to think, how might I put this into practice? Yeah. What's another project or a step? What's the next book I might want to work? I can't keep myself in the moment at all when I'm listening to someone. And in a lot of ways that has served me well, but I mentioned I'm a team leader. I lead a team of 6 full-time employees and 11 contractors. They don't always need me to move things forward for them. So in doing this research, I realized I was holding back some of their growth. Because when they come to me with a problem, I would jump right in and start brainstorming solutions with them. I would come right in and go, you could do this, you could do this, you could this, thinking I'm their leader. Surely they want me to fix the problem for them. Some of them, based on where they are in their career, need the opportunity to figure it out themselves. They don't need me to advance. They need me to discern through with them. They need me to pressure test their ideas as they're trying it out. And so that was a big revelation for me as a leader. I got to stop trying to fix everything and give people an opportunity to fix it themselves. Even when they're coming to talk to me, they might not need me to solve it. But then also, as Nicole mentioned, all interactions require support listening. I realized I don't tell people good job a lot. I don't give a lot of kudos because I think, well, of course you did a good job. I hired you because I thought you would do a good job. I don't give a lot of praise. And yet giving that praise and listening for when someone's talking to you and they need that type of celebration, they need to know I'm proud of them. That really helped me in my conversations as a leader to go, oh, I got to give more praise. Okay. And I don't look at it as manipulative. I look at it as a gift. Thank goodness I'm reminding myself, don't fix everyone's problems. Remember, the people reporting to you probably want praise and probably want you to be proud of them. And I look for ways that I can incorporate that on an individual level to how it matches what they need in that moment.
No, I didn't want you to describe my learning, Maegan. I want you to describe your learning. Nicole, answer the same question. What's changed about you since co-authoring this book?
I'm a discern listener by default. And I'll never forget when we first presented this to our leadership team, our VP of HR said, but Nicole, that's terrible. All you do as a default is judge people, and you judge the information coming in. And my response was, well, Melissa, remember, Maegan and I have made a living off of judging people. Like our Fortune 100 clients literally pay us to dissect their persuasive communication, their visuals, and their delivery, and blame it on the day job. But I've realized, yeah, Nick, that is not what people need all the time. I found myself on our what we call Summer Summit. It's just a Duarte-wide company gathering over the summer. And I was listening to our lovely executive team deliver their keynote speeches and talk about the vision for the rest of the year. And I found myself saying, well, that's a great idea, and that'll never work. And I had to constantly say, Nicole, what does this person need from you right now? I have to constantly check myself. So I think this is a journey for all of us. Communication in general on both sides is a journey. But what I love about it is it's brought more awareness. And that's the first step in making any change. So I'm no expert. I'm not perfect at this, and neither is Maegan. We're still working on it ourselves. But I love that every interaction I have, I'm checking myself, I'm self-monitoring, I'm self-coaching, and I'm analyzing how I did afterwards. Sometimes that comes with an apology to the speaker. I didn't get it right this time. I'm so sorry. But yeah, that's what I've learned, that this is a journey, and that if you just continue to ask yourself that question, what does the person need from me? You will get back on track in giving them what they need.
Well, I think you are an expert, by the way. I know a few marriage therapists that may be on their second marriage. It doesn't mean they're not experts at marriage. Stuff happens. Let's end, Maegan, with the work session. You mentioned it a couple of times. This is what Duarte is known for. In fact, if anyone's listening and you are looking at training your leaders to be better storytellers, training your salespeople how to be more effective communicators at your services, your products, how to listen better. Duarte, I think, is the most competent firm in the world. I am a massive fan of Nancy, your founder. I've read every single book she's ever written. I have bought countless books, giving them to CEOs and colleagues. And one of the things your firm does is you also offer virtual and in-person training sessions for organizations and individuals. Maegan, at my invitation, talk for a few minutes around how might an individual or an organization take the content from the book Adaptive Learning and bring it to their leadership team or their own team inside a company.
Yeah, so as an individual contributor or someone maybe with professional development funds, you might grab a seat in one of our public workshops where you'll get taken through the entirety of the curriculum. You'll learn what your listening style is. You'll learn the characteristics and cautions of that style. And you'll start thinking through, what might the listening styles be of the people I interact with at work? And how might that be serving or not serving our interactions? But then the bulk of the workshop is training you how to adapt to the 4 styles. So no matter where you go as your listening style, an adaptive listener can wear the coat of any one of the styles that they need to in order to show up for the person speaking to them. But if you're a leader or someone who wants to put their team through this, we have come on and done on-sites, or we've been the guest speaker at off-sites to have a micro session, or they've sent an entire part of their organization through the workshop, because that's where you're going to get those compounding transformational benefits. We're all using the same language. We all know how we show up. We know how others might need us to show up. And you're giving yourself permission to get it wrong. I think that's what we don't have in the current listening trainings out there. This workshop gives you a little bit of that ability to say, oops, my bad, I did it the wrong way. So sorry, let me try again. You hadn't have that before. So leaders can do that with their whole teams or as something that just works for themselves.
You call it the SAID model, SAID, support, advance, immerse, and discern. One of my biggest takeaways from the book and this conversation is that you're doing this in 2 ways, right? How you are listening and how you're communicating what you need from your audience are mutually as important. Nicole Lowenbraun and Maegan Stevens, you are the co-authors of this new book, Adaptive Listening, How to Cultivate Trust and Traction at Work. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
Maegan, great to have you here. Your energy for both of you is contagious, and you are, in fact, experts at this. I encourage everyone to visit duarte.com and learn more about adaptive listening. Maegan, thank you for your time as well today.
It was a treat. Thanks, Scott.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.